The idea today is short and sharp, so we can fit in as many voices as possible. And with that in mind, let's welcome our first two guests, our European correspondents. Tze Ming Mok performed the neat trick of leaving New Zealand in the twilight of the last Labour-led government and arriving back just in time to vote for the next one. And Matthew Dentith on the end here has been studying strange ideas on the other edge of Europe at the University of Bucharest. Kia ora koroa.
Welcome.
Salut.
Tze Ming, all my London friends seem to post absolutely desolate things on Facebook. Obviously London didn't want to go with Brexit. It's happening. It seems ghastly. Is it actually as bad as it seems from this far away?
Yes. Well, the thing is, you asked me earlier about what's the mood of London. Well, the thing with British people is that they're very repressed. So if you walk around London and something comes up in the news and you say, oh, have you seen this? And the standard response literally is, I don't want to think about it, it's too depressing. If you're an actual European, and there's plenty of those in London, they're freaking out because for the first time in their lives they're experiencing racism and they don't know how to handle it. I feel bad for them. If you're a non-white person and you grow up in the West, it's something that you get used to throughout your whole life. But if you're swanning around, you're Swedish or something in London, living your whole life, you've got your kids, and suddenly, I have to either leave or I have to go through a huge process of applying for random visas that all the real immigrants had to go through.
That's what the world's like.
They can't handle it.
Is this everyone being mean to me suddenly? That's what they like, isn't it?
Yeah. But it's very, very stressful for them. So London is a combination of super stressed out and really depressed about Brexit.
Because you actually had the day after the Brexit vote, or in the days after, you literally didn't leave the house for a couple of days.
Yeah, I was quite depressed about it. I didn't leave the house for like a couple of weeks because there were hate crimes happening all around my neighbourhood, which is one of the most cosmopolitan, multicultural neighbourhoods in London. And it was really unpleasant. Basically, after every kind of incident like Brexit or any kind of terrorist attack, there's always a backlash or there's always like a resurgence of hate crimes, which is probably why, you should measure them. And the UK does measure it, but only through NGOs, and New Zealand doesn't seem to measure them at all. So
no, we don't have a thing
might be an idea.
We do not have a thing called a hate crime in New Zealand. It doesn't formally exist. It has been pointed out to me by more than one person that what's happening with Britain at the moment with respect to Brexit is actually worse than Trump, because Trump can only be there for a maximum of 8 years. It might be by the end of next year, who knows, but this is permanent for you guys.
Yeah, and people are tying themselves in knots trying to think of potential ways that it could be stopped. Technically, it's possible, but realistically, really, really unlikely. I'm really pissed because I spent like 10 years working my way up to British citizenship, and it cost me like loads of money. And I finally got to across the finish line. I'm getting like one crappy country, and instead of 28 countries, and I'm like really bummed. Really bummed. There goes like our fantasy of retiring on a houseboat in Amsterdam, and my kid getting like free university education in Denmark, and fuck.
That would have been nice, the furniture and all. Matthew, you have been at the other edge of Europe, in Romania. How are things there? Do they want to be European?
Yes, the Romanians really do want to be part of the EU, in part because Romania has a very long history of very corrupt government, and so they see the EU as an external stabilising factor. So, for example, the leader of PSD, the Social Democratic Party in Romania, Livia Dragnea, who can't be an MP because of electoral fraud convictions, is currently under investigation by the EU for financial embezzlement of EU funds. And so Romanians are going, look, if we don't have the EU as an external factor here to moderate what our government does, things are going to be a lot worse. So the reaction by Romanians to Brexit was, what have they done? Have they worked out what they're about to lose?
And on the other hand, we've seen in Poland in recent weeks a march of 60,000 Nazis in Warsaw. Is there anything of the kind in Romania?
Not of that particular kind. I mean, the kind of racism you find in Romania tends to be towards its other indigenous people, the Romani or the Gypsy, who have a long history of being segregated and oppressed by the Romanian state. So there's no explicit marches about foreigners at this particular point in time. The Romanian racism is very much focused on the part of their society they just don't want to admit to.
You've been studying conspiracy theories at the University of Bucharest. Is academic freedom adequate in Romania?
Yes, as far as I was aware, although of course as a Westerner operating in Romania, I had a lot more freedom to say what I wanted to. It's not quite so clear that if I'd been a Romanian academic trying to keep a tenured position, I would have been allowed to go on national TV in Romania and talk an awful lot about the dangers of Russia to the Eastern Bloc at this particular point in time. But no, at this stage, academic freedom is in existence in Romania. That being said, the current Romanian government is looking at taking over research institutes and appointing governors. So they do want to take control of what academics are doing. But there's sufficient pushback at the moment. They're not being successful. But as they say, give them time.
And Tze Ming, what's the state of academic freedom in Britain? Because there was quite recently a call for a purge on pro-Remain academics, wasn't there?
Well, that was more, it wasn't so much an academic freedom issue as a government contracting issue, whereby the government didn't want pro-Remain and specifically European academics to be advising them on, things like Brexit and the costs to the UK of Brexit. So that was just straight up racism, really. But it's not really about academic freedom. It's just about how fucking retarded. Sorry, that was a really, really bad thing to say. How
there is no BSA on the internet.
Sorry,
It's all
I've
right,
had like
it's
that
cool.
much beer, and I'm just going back to like my 1992 brain. But it's, the government has no idea what it's doing. All it can handle at the moment is kind of bad faith posturing. So that's one of the bad faith postures that it's adopted. And yeah, there's a lot of academics who are from the EU. I'm not really sure what their futures are going to be. There probably will be like an exodus, essentially, to some degree, of European academics and an exodus of European funding, an exodus of European students, and basically a slow decline, or maybe a rapid decline of the UK academic sector.
This
It's
sounds
not looking
depressing.
good. It's pretty depressing, yeah. And that's not even getting onto the NHS, man. 1 in 5 doctors are leaving the NHS because of Brexit.
Wow. Jogai, you got anything there?
I'm just having an out-of-body experience listening to this. It's very depressing.
But I'm really happy to be home.
Is Jeremy Corbyn still the answer, and will he be the answer in 4 years' time?
Well, the thing with Jeremy Corbyn is that, like many ideologues, he's like a great campaigner, but not very good at managing. So it's possible that he could lead the Labour Party to victory, but he'll be, the only reason the Labour Party is not in the news anymore or for tearing itself apart is because the Conservatives are tearing themselves apart. The Labour Party's finished tearing itself apart. He's not very good at working with people, but maybe he'll learn. I'm hoping that he will, because...
he's young yet.
He's young, he's got his whole life ahead of him. What they really underestimated was the ground game, the strength of the ground game that emerged around the Corbynista movement. And if there's anything that comes out of the just miserable state of the UK at the moment, there's a lot of talk about like the youth quake and whatever. It's not so much that, the young people are rising up and throwing off the shackles of neoliberalism and so forth. It's just that enough of them have been activated to get into the ground game and do campaigning in ways that is clever and that actually gets the right numbers of people to the polls. And that's what's made a difference in terms of the electoral landscape. And also the disintegration of the Conservative Party. And I think the Labour Party here learnt a fair bit from watching that election as well, in terms of again, the Sindomania and the youthquake was kind of like a bit overreacted here, but there certainly was enough people that joined the campaigning movement for it to make a difference where it helps.
I get the impression it happened here, but not as much as everyone thought it was.
No, there was like a youth blip, but yeah, things like Momentum, which is essentially it's a campaigning organisation, and they use social media very well. It's not really about like, oh, look how many people watch this video, but about directing people to the actual polling booth, actually transporting them to the polling booth, registering them to vote, and then taking them to vote. That's, I think, is where it has made a certain difference.
Right, but like you said, despite the whole thing of the youthquake, even a week before the elections, it was something like 250,000 young people were still yet to enrol between the age bracket of 18 to 25 or something. So
yeah, it's kind of overplayed.
Matthew, as I noted before, you are a conspiracy theory specialist. This must be a particularly rich time for your field.
Yes, I mean, in the age of Trump, conspiracy theories have become such a recurrent and popular part of contemporary political discourse that it's quite hard to cope with as an academic, because as someone who's writing on conspiracy theories, the lead time between writing an article or a book and going to publication is anywhere between 3 months to a year and a half. And on some level, what we're seeing with the Trump regime, it's quite fast, the things which are coming out. But the lead time between my writing about something and it being published means that anything I want to say about Trump now could be entirely outdated by the time I see print. And so it's kind of both a boon and a detriment. What was interesting to me living in Romania for a year was just how big the George Soros conspiracy theories are. And that George Soros isn't a major figure in conspiracy theories here in Aotearoa, but in Eastern Europe, George Soros is the figure behind everything. Romanians think that he's a secret Hungarian plant designed to bring down the current government, except when they want money from George Soros, at which point he is the boon to their society. Bulgarians think that George Soros is a Romanian plant trying to destroy the Bulgarian government. The Hungarians think he's both Romanian and Hungarian, trying to destroy... It's just all over the place. So, yeah, conspiracy theories have become really, really big. I got into this field at just the right time.
Well, I suppose, it's an advantage that you have. You do a podcast, you're on Twitter. Is that the reality of being an academic specialist in this field, is that you can't wait that long for you can't wait for publication?
No, you need to be up to date with all of these things, because you need to be aware of what the evidential biases are, the way that people are constructing explanations from the available evidence, the kind of theories which are popular at one particular time. One of the big things about spending time in Eastern Europe is the realization that what we take to be conspiracy theories here are often official theories elsewhere. I found this when I was in the Baltic states a few years ago. For people in Latvia, conspiracies are just a normal part of everyday politicking, and the idea that we would dismissively call something a conspiracy theory and ignore it ignores the reality of their lived experience. So, yeah, this is one of those points in time where you need to be active, you need to be online, and you need to be aware of everything which is going on. The problem is, there's too much going on, and I don't have enough time in the day to be able to keep up with the conspiracy theories I know about, let alone find the new ones which are appearing at a huge rate of knots.
Indeed. Yeah, it's frightening. Now it's time to actually go from across the world to across the road and introduce our next guest, the one who was here before.
Yes, please welcome our community advocate and ACE local networker, Tina Plunkett.
Yeah.
Let's all clap.
Do you want to bring a chair stool for yourself? And I guess you'll have to go just down the end there, yeah. Tina, one thing that's impressed me about your local knowledge is that you tend to know not just what political types are thinking, but what businesses are thinking. And we've seen a degree of discontent and unhappiness particularly in West Lynn, about things that we normally think are great, i.e. cycle lanes. Is that... how do we deal with that? Because there is going to be a difficult period of change, isn't there?
I think there is. Thank you for starting me off lightly. I think there needs to be... Both sides need to stop and look at the whole of all the projects that are happening. We all know there's some long-term projects happening throughout the whole of central Auckland. We've got Cutting a Happy Road happening as well. We know logically that Ponsonby is going to have some cycleways. Hope that's not breaking news to anyone. And obviously the Westland shops have happened. A lot of people would agree that the design has been a little bit over-designed in the Westland shops, but the change needed to happen at the same time. But there seems to be this kind of dump on everyone on one side and then dump back on the other. So I think people need to stop a little bit.
Do you think people are going to calm down once the work is done and they can see how it does work?
Absolutely.
But how long is that going to be?
Being a parent around central Auckland, being someone that uses public transport and a cyclist with my child, Westland shops have never worked. They've been dangerous. The crossing's been dangerous. Cars with priority. It's a massive wide road, etc., etc. They've changed something that in the first stage looks rather dramatic, but there'll be softenings, and I believe that the cycleway has to be delineated and cars will stop parking in the cycleway, and I think it's a positive change.
But the rich hippies need their car parks. They need
do.
their angle parks outside Harvest.
The one that I love is apparently they need their car parks right outside the bar. That does my head in. You don't need a car park outside the bar. You can walk. I think someone's worked out there's you have to walk an extra 12 metres to Harvest at the furthest point of the car parks.
This is an outrage.
Outrage. We're so sorry.
I think the first time I ever talked to you about these kinds of issues was around K Road, and at that point everyone was terrified about K Road gentrifying.
It did.
How's the gentrification going?
I think it's safe to say K Road did gentrify, and it's people like me that moved in the 90s. We can't blame the people that are moving in now for gentrifying, but there's places around the world that actually use artists to move into areas to lift areas as a practical solution, because then they become exciting and interesting. K Road obviously is trying to hold on to that part, and I think they will, but they have to have that relationship with the people that are moving in. I've heard some great little stories of some of the new neighbours moving in and wanting to problem solve the prostitutes that are outside their buildings, and are cheekily being told, "Oh, so glad you came to talk to us about that. Yeah, we should build them a shelter and have them somewhere safe they can live, live and work." So yeah, I think things like that will happen along Cutting a Happy Road.
Yeah. Can the resident freak community do anything to help its own case as well?
I think sit at the table. I think that's something we've always talked about. I'm a firm believer that I don't think you have to be elected onto something to sit at the table. We have boards all around Auckland, especially at the moment in the past 5 years, that have been sitting and planning our city quietly. And it's amazing, the people that have time to sit around the table and talk and say what they want for the future of the city tend to be a lot older than me. I have sat on one particular project where I was the youngest person, I think by about 20 years, and I'm in my 40s. They're literally planning our city. And a lot of this is volunteer. So if you want to have your say, you have to sit at the table. And they will gladly welcome you, because most of the people that do have time are retired, and I'm not being ageist here. I think past generations have done wonderful things for our city, but it's time for them to sit back, empty some seats, and give it to the 20 and 30-year-olds, and actually encourage people to sit there. And you get free food sometimes. It's good.
Yeah, because you are on the board of you are literally by about 30 years the youngest person on the board of the Grafton Cemetery Preservation Committee or whatever.
Oh, no, so I just did that as the project, but I have removed... I'm no longer working on that. But that was a phenomenal project to work on. A green space in the city is the Simon Street Cemetery, It's compartmentalised due to motorways and traffic, but you can geek out about that stuff massively. You can find out about cycleways that are going to happen, what's happening with the motorway there, and you get to have your say about the cultural relevance and the religious relevance for a future of the city. That cemetery is highly Christian, obviously. And you can have some fun because we've got a really diverse multicultural city happening in the future, and we need to recognise that people are dying and we need to create spaces for them.
Do you think a group like Gen Zero is vital to the structure of our society?
I love Gen Zero. I think they're
Me
cool.
too.
That was really exciting for me because I wasn't engaged with them, but I saw this group kind of open up and start, and it kind of gave permission for younger people to have heaps of voices. Whereas sometimes a little while ago, I definitely felt like, Tina's complaining about something about roads again, So getting that kind of really practical young voice. And it really isn't so young. I don't know why we keep calling them young. 20s and 30s isn't that young for planning.
Younger.
Yeah, it is, but it's younger. It's younger, yeah. I think that's really important. And I think there's actually been a change. If you think about what happened 5 years ago and what's actually happening now, you are seeing a lot of younger people sitting, enrolling, getting voted in, even in Parliament.
Chloe.
Exciting.
Our travellers, have you noticed in the time you've been away? I mean, you've both been, it was about a year since you were last in Auckland, Tze Ming, and you've been away a year. Have you noticed the changes?
I've seen a lot more homeless people on the streets. There were a lot of homeless people on the street in Romania, but seeing an almost equivalent number here, that's been pretty chilling.
Not much good yum cha anymore left in Auckland.
Oh, no. No, what you're saying is you know where the good yum cha is, but you're not telling us.
No, the old Hong Kong families, their kids are all doctors now. They don't want to make yum cha.
We're going to have all of these guys back on the panel later on, and one thing I forgot to mention is that there is a bucket there at which you can write down questions for the panel, and do that, and feel free to make them humorous. We quite like that.
But again, questions, not a TED talk.
No, well, that's one reason we get you to write them down is so you don't do a fucking TED talk. But is there one question for any of the panellists before we move on? All right. Future of Europe. You two.
I'd just like to pay tribute to the post-war consensus and its passing this year. 66 years. It was a good run for, those two basic principles of Nazis are bad and human rights are universal. Big round of applause for the post-war consensus. Yeah. Dead and gone, but not forgotten by some old people like me.
So I think for people in Eastern Europe, the future's looking relatively bright, although that being said, there are places like Croatia and Hungary, which have major Nazi party influences in their government. The future of Europe overall, I guess we have to see what that divorce bill is going to look like and what the consequences are for the EU. How are they going to cope, but also...
How are they going to cope with Britain leaving?
Well, how are they going to cope with the celebrations of when they can get rid of those really angsty, annoying Brits who've been interfering with European politics for such a long time?
True. Yeah, maybe that's just going to make Europe way more efficient.
Possibly.
And happier. We're going to take a break.